Ideally, this video series is going to be for students who, for whatever reason, had to deploy due to military needs or got a job opportunity, move out of state, and they attended the training for a significant amount of time, but then were not able to complete the curriculum. Our system is a combative system. It's intended for self-defense and military law enforcement application, tactical combatives. It is not sport fighting. The motto of the school is, our job is to create a massive problem to solve for the enemy when they opt for hand-to-hand combat with us. So in the realm of sport fighting, it can be point-based, one-on-one, the referee. Most fights don't end in knockout, they end in decision, meaning that judges sit there and on a point merit-based system decide who won based on who, landed the most amount of hits, had the best technique, what have you. However, in a self-defense or combatives situation, it's being able to control chaos or create more chaos for the enemy than the enemy can create for you, even though they laid the ambush, right? Tactical mind, preemptive attack, situational awareness, things of that nature, right? Responding to violence with violence, and more particularly, if you're in the law enforcement realm, adequate amount of violence, right? So our job is to create a massive problem to solve for the enemy when they opt for hand-to-hand combat with us. With that being said, we are going to talk about some of the additional philosophy that we really cover in the level 1 portion of the curriculum. So two of the things I like to say up front before we get into that, most combatives, like for instance, sport fighting, people fight in weight divisions and height divisions, more specifically weight divisions. And they're of equal size. There's rarely size disparity in those situations. You might have guys like Tyson that are heavyweights in that weight division that are shorter than their opponent, but they're pound for pound in that division because they're capable of handling that weight class. In a combative situation or self-defense situation, the individual might be 6'2", 250 pounds, and you're in my case where you're 5'3", under 136 pounds. So manuals tend to be written for individuals that are 6'2", 200 pounds. In my opinion, in my personal experience, all my years in the military, different jobs and etc., a lot of times manuals, techniques, a good percentage of them are done with the mindset that you're going to be of equal size, height to your opponent. You know, a good example is judo throws. There are judo throws that a 5'3" individual just are not going to perform exactly the way that they're taught against an individual who is 6'4" and 250 pounds. But if somehow that large individual takes my back in a manner that I've trained and conducted a judo throw enough times that I feel that I have a hold of their body and their hip is in a particular place on top of my hips, and in the general motion of our movement, my brain says, hey, I'm familiar with where we're at in time and space. I'm going to continue this motion in this manner and see if I can get them over. You know, it may not even be that they get thrown the way they do typically in a judo throw between two people of same height. It may just be that I use that throw type technique and the person just sort of falls or comes off of me and lands on the ground, right? So that's kind of the mindset behind it, is that a lot of times I see large instructors with smaller students, and the student can figure out the technique, or they're doing the technique, they're doing 100% correct, they're doing 100% accurately, but it's not working for them. And the student will continue, or the instructor will continue to, well, maybe you're doing this wrong, or maybe you're doing that wrong, or blah, 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 right? Because the student's doing it with a larger student, a larger partner, and it's not functional. Well, first off, you should probably find a student of equal height for that particular judo throw. And then if they're doing everything correctly and with the person of equal height, then there's nothing to fix. But if you identify their point of failure in a partner of equal height, right, you can fix it with that partner of equal height and then go back to trying it with a larger opponent. And then if it still doesn't work with the larger opponent, then that student still needs to learn it for when they become an instructor, and they have to teach it to students of their own that it may be applicable for. But for them personally, it's not in their repertoire of actual self-defense. It's not something that they should be trying to call upon or learn for the purposes of application, right? So bearing that in mind, right? So the emphasis there is that always watch out for field manuals and techniques, because in my opinion, they're mostly all written for guys of average height, of average weight. So does it apply to this individual? Is it a failing of the student, or is it a failing of the idea or concept of the technique itself? The next thing is that will expedite your self-defense training, martial arts training, really anything in life, is negate performance anxiety. And this comes from a Kung Fu Sifu that I can't think of his name off the top of my head right now, but I am going to recommend various different YouTube channels involving Kung Fu, other martial arts, and philosophical things, because martial arts is about more than just fighting. But he stated that don't try to do the movement, enjoy the movement. If you see a technique, you learn a technique, and you're trying to do that technique, right? And you're trying to do it right, and you're doing it for the purpose of just doing the technique, it tends to be this stiff, rigid, frustrating thing that you overthink, overcomplicate. But very simply put, that if you learn to enjoy the movement and you're relaxed with it and you're having fun with that movement, eventually your brain actually tends to figure things out a little bit quicker, all right? So going into what is actually written here as the additional philosophy, all right? So the first thing we're going to cover is the kind of what we talked about in the beginning when we talked about our motto. Our job is to create a massive problem to solve for the enemy when they opt for hand-to-hand combat with us, right? Creating chaos. Essentially, there's an FBI statistic that pertains specifically to female self-defense, and that is that 86% of attacks on women were successfully diffused if the woman fought back. So there's a good YouTube video that I'm also going to publish in a playlist that most people have probably seen it in the self-defense community. It's a woman, she's in a gym, she lets another guy in because he's a regular there and she's seen him multiple times. He attacks and she has no formal training. She admits it in a later interview that she had no formal self-defense training. She just went absolutely ballistic, started throwing hands, kept moving while he was trying to grab her so that he couldn't fix her position and control her, and then eventually broke controlled distance, got objects between the two of them, and then made her way out of the facility and called the police. If you just do something in a fight, in a self-defense situation, and continue to move and continue to fight and continue to try to gain distance and use the environment around you, your probability of survivability goes up exponentially. The level 1 curriculum in our system has somewhere around 110 techniques, I think. It's pretty grueling. I have a high expectation of all level 1 techniques because it's the foundation of everything you're going to do in the future. And it covers multiple different self-defense disciplines in their simplest, most basic techniques. If you take that statistic, 86% of people that just did something, and now you add 110 sound techniques that you've conducted many, many repetitions, thousands of repetitions on, now your survivability and your ability to take the fight to the enemy if need be, right? If escape is not an option, or if you're an operator or law enforcement and you have no choice but to close the distance with that subject or that bad guy. When you have 110 techniques or 300 techniques or 400 techniques, by the time you complete a system, 600, 1,000 techniques that you've repped and repped and repped, every time you get you add more of a thought process with repetition that builds motor engrams into your brain, you become much more lethal, that much more controlled. Or you have the ability to stay calm, cool, and collected and not be lethal, where most people would have to be lethal to survive, right? Law enforcement's a big area there where you really can't be lethal when you're fighting until they pull a knife, until they pull a gun, until you start to lose consciousness because they've hit you in the head too hard and the lights are going out, and now it's a deadly force encounter, right? So you're able to control also that dichotomy by the more techniques you learn and the more repetitions you conduct on those techniques, right? So coming back to that FBI statistic, 80% of attacks on women were successfully diffused if the woman fought back, just creating chaos. Now we add techniques to that chaos, our survivability goes up, our ability to control the situation goes up. Everything has an edge on it. In that, this is something I emphasize a lot because people tend to separate knife from open hand fighting. The problem is that a knife can be deployed, right? And I even had to take the safety off there, not realizing that I had put it on, deployed it, and I still got it out in a reasonable amount of time, right? It doesn't take much. And for people that practice being sneaky with it, right, and they're fighting, and they have all sorts of different, like, switchblade type knives and everything that can deploy rapidly, if someone's throwing hands and punches, it can turn into an edged weapon real quick. I have a personal story. I'm not going to go into all the details. I'm going to try and stay away from anything that's LE sensitive, military sensitive in a direct nature. But there was a guy that got stabbed in his face and his neck 7 times before he was able to get a shot off into the individual with firing from the hip. So it happens very, very quick. And they deploy that knife sneaky. And 1 minute you're in a boxing match and the next minute you're bleeding before you realize that maybe that first or second or third punch had actually turned itself into an edge weapon. So one of the things around edge weapon is you should never be trying to control the knife. You'll never catch that knife. That knife moves like as fast as a piston in a car, and it changes angles from everywhere. So ideally, as long as you're always trying to defeat the punch or defeat the strike the same way, right? So if a straight punch comes in towards my center line and I block that straight punch with an L block, or if I practice Kali and I use some type of Kali Senawali, or if I don't recommend most boxing techniques because boxing believes heavily in cover and using those big padded gloves to protect you. When you're close in like this and a knife is coming in at you, especially if you treat knife like knife and punch like punch, you're going to be blocking punches and absorbing impact with all your cover techniques. And when the knife comes in, you're going to be slow to the party to reacting. You see law enforcement, they always have their hands up and out, even if they're trying to be passive about it, right? This is to create a frame to keep that hand from getting anywhere near their vital organs or their neck or their face, what have you. So ideally, you want to treat, when the knife is coming, whether it's knife or it's hand, you're controlling the limb that's controlling the object. So if someone throws a punch and I would try to block it and then grab it for control, for the purposes of controlling that individual or that subject and getting them to the ground and getting them in the handcuffs, right? That same sort of concept applies to knife. I don't want to try and attack the knife or block the knife or fight the knife. There's this saying that you have to get cut in a knife fight. Well, no, you don't. All right, you're going to get cut in a knife fight. Well, no, you're not necessarily going to get cut in a knife fight. You have to go with the mentality and not afraid of the knife, with the acceptance of the fact that you can and possibly will get stabbed or cut, but you don't have to get cut with a knife. That's not a guarantee. If you're good at keeping up with the speed of someone's hand movements, Kali is a really good martial art for this, right? All sorts of different drills to speed up your hand movement and acquire movement to redirect that movement, right? Then you have jiu-jitsu for control. You have Krav Maga for counter violence. There's multiple different disciplines that you really should be trying to, when it comes to the knife, you shouldn't be picking any one discipline. Anything that makes your reflexes faster, anything that continues to create different solutions to different angles of movement, whether it be broad or small, right? You need to learn how to acquire limbs and capture and trap and stop limb movement, okay? And that's ideally the concept of everything has an edge on it. I don't treat a knife different than I treat a punch. Like one of the things in Krav Maga, for instance, is that a lot of the straight punch deflections and the 360 defenses translates to how we get a hold of a limb to control it for some type of figure four Kimura Americana standing, right, lock to transition to takedowns, okay? All these disciplines sort of train on that same concept. So everything has an edge on it. If while you're fighting against hands, you imagine that, what would I do if this hand had a knife in it, right? So keep that in mind. All right, hand disappears behind opponent and rapidly reappears weapon. Assume that a weapon could have entered the fight. So kind of continuing on with that sort of knife concept, right? If someone's fighting with you and their hand disappears for a second, goes behind their back, goes down to their pocket, you see a pluck of the shirt, something to that effect, some type of quick, fast hand movement. If you're in there blocking and everything else and incoming punches, and maybe you're in CQB close quarters range where your elbows and knees, then anytime hands kind of disappear and you see them go for a waistband, waistline type of area, there's a chance something else in the last few split seconds entered the situation. And we're going to talk more in depth about how to deal with these specific things later on. Footwork, change of angles, things of that nature. Keep your opponent guessing. Counter violence with superior violence, right? But consider that in mind. If their hands disappear and come back into the fight, they might have something in it. So the next piece of this is the individual that accelerates through the meeting point with the best footwork and solid structure wins the initiative. And we're going to talk about what I call the rifleman's posture, right? And the reason why I call it a rifleman's posture for combatives is because all animals, whether it be human, right, lion, tiger, dog, wolf, bear, every animal has its own way that if it knows it's about to be involved in conflict, it postures up. And in the animal kingdom, you'll see hair stand up on its back, its fur will puff out, it'll show all of its fangs, start drooling, foaming at the mouth. These are things to get that, for the animal to try and look larger, more intimidating, so have a psychological effect on the enemy. Then how it poises its body lowers its head, right, in order to protect its head, and starts to maneuver with its feet to try and get around and flank its prey, right? So human beings are no different. For some reason, though, because society's gotten soft or whatever have it, we need to be trained and go to schools and go to karate class to learn, to relearn how our apex predator mindset works in a fight. Versus in the animal kingdom, you know, as soon as a puppy becomes a dog, it knows how to tear up its enemy, right? We have a kitten in the house right now that's terrorizing everything and chasing everything into every corner of the house, trying to hide from it because it already knows how to use its claws to attack the other animal's face, right? And it's straight out the gate. That's its survivor mechanism in action, in the works. So we have a specific way as well that we prepare for a fight or absorbed impact, recoil from a weapon system, or absorb recoil from an opponent that's trying to double leg takedown or simply trying to bulldoze over us, or a larger opponent that attempts to just run us over like a freight train, right? There's a specific way that is very simple to absorb impact, all right? And that basic concept is what I call the rifleman's posture, right? Because the way we do anything is the way we do everything. And ideally, if I'm on a rifle, okay, there's old school mentality, if you've ever been to specialty shooter schools, that you really got to get aggressive on the weapons platform and you're super bent over and really hyper leaned into it. And I get the concept and why they're hammering this home with students when we went to the schools. But it doesn't have to be that drastic, that dramatic. The idea, though, is that the reason why they have you lean into it so extensively is so that you get used to, on a rifle, if my first round goes down range, if I'm standing straight up to where my shoulders are over my hips and my hips are over my heels, that first round, if I have my sights lined up, squeeze my trigger, that first round is definitely going to hit, say, a 2-inch bullseye. It's going to hit a small space. It's going to hit exactly what it's aimed at. However, with that, even that light a bit on, say, an AR-15 or an M4, right? When that weapon system recoils, it's going to bump into my heels rather than the balls of my feet. And it's going to affect my ability to stabilize that weapon so that I can immediately get that second shot off if I need it. So if I'm doing a controlled pair or even a hammer is a very rapid fire. It's bang, bang instead of bang, bang, right? If I'm up on my heels when it rocks me back, it's going to be bang, and then I'm going to have to come back down on target and shoot again. If I have my shoulders forward of my hips, of my knees, punched into the weapons platform, lean forward, that automatically rocks all of my body weight towards the balls of my feet and into the balls of my feet, whether it's firing a weapon, whether it's sprawling and recovering from someone shooting in for my hips or shooting in for takedown, whether it's punching, whether it's absorbing any kind of impact whatsoever, the balls of my feet is ideally where I want to be, right? So in order for that to happen, I have to have my hands up, shoulders leaned slightly forward of my hips and my knees, all right? And then I'm into it. And that will rock my body weight towards the ball of my feet rather than the heels. That way, when I absorb impact, I'm already into the balls of my feet, and that's where the recoil goes, all right? Instead of the heels. If I get caught off guard and I'm just standing there and I lean towards the opponent in some way, some shape, some form, then I'm shifting that weight to the balls of my feet. It's getting me ready to absorb impact. Okay? So the other piece of that is have your hands up at least eye level out at about 90 degrees or beyond. From here, gravity can help me drop down and block things below, right? But if my hands are low, bringing them up quickly it takes timing away. So if I always have my hands up at eye level, protecting ideally my head and these vitals that are inside the sides of my neck, then I'll be quick, right? So hands out, shoulders forward of hips, forward of knees will take me into the balls of my feet, and my hands up at eye level and out will give me quicker reactionary time to acquire incoming threats. And then if I have to block something low, gravity helps me with that. And then as soon as I block it, I try to get my hands back up to my face. And that ideally is the stance, right? What I call the rifleman's posture. So with that posture, if two objects accelerate towards each other at the same time, the one with the best posture is going to win that fight. Even if heavy weight, a larger opponent hits me and drives me back, I'm still not losing if I have control of my center of gravity and I'm in a position where my footwork is set that I can maneuver, redirect. But if I have a weak posture and they accelerate through me and try and steamroll me with their weight and their size and I'm on my heels, I lose. Okay, so all right, so what you're really trying to develop in self-defense is learn to maintain your center of gravity while maintaining hand-eye coordination while utilizing combative movements. That statement kind of speaks for itself. So what you are really trying to develop in self-defense is learning to maintain your center of gravity, which is something we just discussed, through staying in the balls of my feet and no matter what, that forward-leaning posture and knowing where my center of gravity is at. increasing hand-eye coordination, right? So Filipino Collie is great for increasing your hand-eye coordination. You'll be fast to grab hands, catch hands, move hands, redirect hands. And then hand-eye coordination also sort of incorporates the feet, right? I see an incoming threat. I've got enough repetitions to build motor engrams. You know, I know how to move my feet, how to move my hands, how to move my body in concert within seconds. You know, I have a rehearsed response for any movement that the human body can make while trying to attack me, okay? And while using techniques, actual combatives movements that are gonna make me successful. Okay, so the last thing I'm gonna talk about too is the philosophy of distance. One, you always want to control distance, whether that be maintain distance. If you're one-on-one with an individual and they're kind of out of their mind, they're mentally unstable, possibly on drugs, and you're waiting for law enforcement to arrive, and you have an open dialogue, you can't really escape because they're just going to pursue and lose it and try and, but you're in some kind of open dialogue type situation. You want to control distance for a prolonged period of time. Or if you are law enforcement, you're waiting for your backup to arrive and you got that, you know, that OC spray or something like that ready to go. And you're waiting for backup, but you're still in a state of open dialogue where that individual hasn't done anything crazy yet. There's that concept of range and distance. And then there's also, you know, training range versus reality range. So when I'm training with an opponent, right, or with a partner, a training partner, step and kick range is kick range, right? So what do I mean with that? And this is where I also to understand that when you're training in a safe environment and you're not actually, you're training with a partner, and even if you're sparring and you're not really trying to like kick their knees backwards, you have to understand that when I'm just trying to play touch and sparring, or if I'm practicing a technique, you know, like I kick and then I move in, my kick range in training, which is the surface area, I'm getting to the surface area with my training partner, right? I'm not actually following through kicking them in the groin because that would get old real quick. So it seems like I've got all this safety range between me and my opponent, and I'm going to build a false sense of security with that, right? So the reality is that I have to go through my target. I am a short individual. That means I have to be able to go from hands out blocking range to covering range, close quarters, elbows, and knees range very rapidly to get a kickoff, right? When I actually step and kick with an opponent, right, if that's not going to be a very effective kick. So when I'm practicing regular kick range with a training partner, I sort of have to realize that that range is actually it's kind of like step and kick, right? So if I want to step and kick an opponent, I actually have to be at my normal training kick range. So my training kick range is my step and kick range. So I'm going to step and kick so that I'm kicking through. Training range versus reality range. Step and kick range is kick range. Kick range is punch range is elbow range, and elbow range is grapple range. So if I'm going to step and kick in training with a training partner, I can't kick my training partner's knees backwards. So when I step and kick with my training partner, I'm going to be about there. I'm going to make surface contact with a full range kick to teach me to fully extend my kicks, not throw these little fake punches up and close. So when we're training with a training partner for safety purposes, a step and kick to the surface area gives me a false sense of safety on distance. I need to keep in mind that when I step and kick, my training, my regular kick without step and kick, right, with a training partner, that range, where I kick to the surface area, my regular kick range is actually my step and kick range. My real life step and kick range against a live enemy adversary, right? So my kick range, again, to the surface area with my training partner for safety purposes, is actually my step and kick range in real life. So I step, kick through to collapse that knee. My training punch range is actually my kick range. So I punch to the surface area on my training partner because I can't punch my training partner's actual head off, all right? So when I'm sparring and I'm just making that surface contact in sparring, right, I have to realize that I have to actually get in closer and deeper in order to strike through the target like I'm supposed to with a punch for it to be powerful and effective. So my surface, like for instance, for my actual straight kick, my punch range on a training partner for safety purposes is actually my kick range, which is the kick range is longer, right? So I'm here and I go to kick, I'm kicking through the kneecap. So that's I'm gonna have, in reality, I'm gonna be closer to my opponent when I'm actually kicking through the enemy, a real enemy, than when I'm kicking a training partner. So just know that in all these situations, in real life fighting, I'm going to be in CQB range real fast, because this is actually, that regular kick range is where it starts, because this is my step and kick range, right? With Gleecha, and there's a kind of a gray area in that one, right? Step and kick can cover a lot of distance, especially when you use Gleecha, right? So, but when you're talking kick range, for someone like me who's 5'3", and this individual might be 6 foot and their arms are as long as my legs, I have to realize that when I get in there to kick, even with Gleecha, I'm going to be relatively quick, really fast, or relatively close, really fast. So when I get to elbow range, starting to get to elbow range, I'm actually in punch range. If I want to punch through, follow through, and throw knockout-worthy punches. And then when you're in elbow range, you're in CQB range. You are in grapple range. Hence the need for quick elbows and knees and things of that nature. So just understand as you train, and that range in training for safety purposes or sparring, right? Roundhouse kicks, those distance are essentially the same distance, right? That distance doesn't change because that's a lateral strike and attack. The only difference is the follow through, right? But things where I'm going straight forward and back, those distances tend to be unrealistic when I'm sparring against a partner who I don't want to break in half, to the actual distance of real CQB close quarters battle with an enemy for the need of follow through and striking through your target. Okay. So those are some of the philosophies, the basic philosophies, and really philosophical fundamental concepts that level 1 encompasses.